It's a very personal thing for me because the amount of change that I've seen in my own lifetime is very much parallel to these developments that have happened over a number of decades. So I point out that this does not say it's the history of Byzantine music in English. It's a history as experienced and seen by me in interacting with many people in this country over the years, being a chanter, being a choir director, and things like that. So let's talk about what existed prior to the 1970s. Those of you who've read the St. Raphael book, or who participated in the Adult Bible Bowl, know that, New England champion here, but know that in 1898, St. Raphael compiled an Arabic language, synecdomos, called the Book of True Consolation in the Divine Prayers. And I know we have some Arabic speakers here. Someone can pronounce that. I can't. But that was the name of the book in Arabic. The English translation is the Book of True Consolation in the Divine Prayers. And what we typically found in our parishes is we had immigrant chanters who chanted in Arabic back then by ear, as there was no music available. And even in the old country, even in Lebanon, Syria, and those places, there weren't any books of Byzantine music in Arabic until Mitri al-Mur, who you've heard about over the years, actually wrote it down in the Byzantine notation in Arabic. So keep that in mind, because that certainly affects our history here in the Antiochian Archdiocese in terms of how were people trained. They were trained by ear. They came over to these shores and they chanted the way that they knew how to chant, but there were no there was no music that people could look at and sing together. This book by St. Raphael was an effort to actually at least have the book that had all of the important texts, so that there were some texts that the people could chant from, albeit in Arabic back then. In 1938, that's when St. Raphael's book was translated into English, known as Divine Prayers and Services, and more commonly known by those of us who've used it as the 5-pounder, because it's a really big book. And that was done by Hieromonk Seraphim Nasser. Again, so that was the first book where we had all the texts that we needed, and chanting was done exclusively from text, as there was little music available unless someone happened to have written something down. So new chanters really learned by ear from experienced chanters. So it really was an oral tradition. And I have an interesting excerpt here, and I believe, and hopefully Mike or somebody here can confirm, I believe this is Kazan chanting back in 1960. Okay, yeah, one of the things I want you to notice here that will be telling when we talk about Kazan's project. Can you hear that? Can you hear that? So that was over the barbarians, okay? Just note the emphasis in the syllables there, okay? All right, so that I believe that was some kind of at least regional liturgy they did in Houston back there in 1960. All right. Say it again? Yeah, I don't think that would have been the record just because of the background noise and the... He did do a record, okay. All right. So in 1970, when I was fairly young, so all this stuff was kind of happening, at the beginning of my lifetime here. What was basically happening? At that time, as I was starting to learn a little something about Byzantine chant, it really was in decline in the Archdiocese for a number of reasons. In a lot of parishes, it was often done only in Arabic by immigrant chanters, so Americans really couldn't relate to the language of the music. They just couldn't understand it. That happens in some parishes today. Many of the immigrants from the first wave who came in, which was in the late 1800s through 1920, which was when my grandparents came from Lebanon, were dying off at that time. And some people learned the tones well enough to be able to chant by ear. But again, there was no music available to make it easier for someone to get quickly up the learning curve. You basically had to stand there with a chanter and learn the traditional way that people have been doing this, for generations. There were also attitudes dating back decades within this country that Byzantine music was somehow, too foreign for worship in the Western world, and that we should be like our Catholic and Protestant brethren with four-part choirs, and even, God forbid, organs. It's just like, no, we're going to embrace it all. And my point here is not, anything wrong with four-part music. My point is that what happened in the effort to kind of embrace and acculturate here was kind of like the Byzantine music got forgotten. People just didn't pay attention to thinking about, can it be done here in a way that people who natively grow up here, that it can touch them, that it can move them, that they can get the experience in this country that people get from the chant in the countries that they came from. So typically what we found, as Mike really documented very well yesterday, is we had choirs that sang either four-part Slavic music or harmonized arrangements of Byzantine melodies, but we really didn't have choirs singing Byzantine chant back then in a true monophonic with drone format. And then came the Kazan project. And obviously, since that's our project, I'll spend a fair bit of time talking about that today. In the introductory letter that Metropolitan Philip wrote that you got with your Kazan book, he said the purpose of this project, and this project really came about because of his vision, and we all know he was a visionary, was to melodize, according to the traditional Byzantine settings, the hymnography of the divine services of our Holy Church. To do it in English and with Western musical notation, and for the benefit of English-speaking Orthodox Christians. And I'm supposed to have something else to play here. So here we have the well-known, "O Lord, I Have Cried" in tone 1 by Kazan. Right, if I do that, then you can't hear me. I was going to talk over this. So this project came out pretty much when I was learning to chant, and years later, probably actually it was the last time I actually sat down with Metropolitan Philip at his residence. People that don't know, I grew up at St. Anthony's in Bergenfield, New Jersey, which was on the border. That church is really on the border of Bergenfield and Englewood. So I kind of grew up in the backyard of the Archdiocese. I knew the Metropolitan, all my life. And he told me the last time I saw him, which was a few years before his passing, that he created this project for people like me, people who were musicians, that he wanted to get interested in Byzantine chant. And I think from that perspective, everyone will agree that this opened the door, for a number of people to actually start to explore it. So if you want to take a look at this Byzantine music project over the first volume, which was Vespers, that came out in '74, and then I think Orthros came out in '76, and then, as Mike said, volumes kept coming out. They did Holy Week 1, Holy Week 2, the Pentecostarian, they did Lent 1, Lent 2, and then they took the Manan, which took many, many years. It was well into the 1990s, and Kazan was continuing to compose this music. And I decided to go and ask a few people, who are experts in Byzantine chant outside of our archdiocese to get their perspective on Kazan, because we have our own perspective, and certainly I have a personal perspective on this, because this was my introduction into the chant. If you're wondering how I got a chant book, it's actually a neat story. Because at our parish, then Father Basil was our assistant priest at St. Anthony's in Bergenfield. When I was coming home from college, I would always visit him at the Archdiocese headquarters. And one day he just walked into the bookstore, which is no longer there. It's now all been moved here. Walked into the bookstore and he just pulled the Kazan Orthros off the shelf. And he's like, you're a musician. Here, learn this. And otherwise, I wouldn't have even known that this music was there. And that's basically how I got my start. So the experts, basically, their perspective on this is that this music project was historic and important, that it was the first large-scale attempt to make Byzantine music available in English, and it was transcribed into Western notation to make it available to Western musicians trained in North America. And it was based upon the original Hymnodia hymn book produced by Holy Cross Seminary Press in 1956 by the professor of ecclesiastical chant, Christos Vironidis. It really enabled people for the first time, as Mike said yesterday, to be able to chant together in English from the same music. Some quotes here from some of the professors I talked to over at Holy Cross Seminary. Kazan was and is and always will be a pioneer by transposing our Byzantine chant hymns from the ancient notation into Western music. It is the foundational historical work. That's Father Nicholas Castanas. And then from Garamenos Karanos, or Menios, as some of us know him, who teaches over at Holy Cross as well, and directs the seminary's choir. It served the very important role of preserving the core Byzantine melodies in the liturgical life of the Church of America. And I think that's a great statement, from him. And it goes right hand in hand, if you look at what Metropolitan was saying he was trying to do, to melodize the hymnography of the divine services of our Holy Church. So here we have Dr. Karanos basically saying that it preserved those core melodies in our liturgical life. This is something you may never have seen before. On the right, that's actually Kazan's originals, okay, in Byzantine notation, at least for this project. And on the left is what would eventually go into the Benayan. Chris has already done September, so I know Chris has worked on this. And one of the interesting things here, I think, is that certainly when Kazan was writing Byzantine music, he was putting in things in the Byzantine notation that you'd expect to be there that would show you where emphasis is. Let me get my mouse pointer here if you can see it. Petastis and stuff like that, which indicate where you do a flutter, or an accent. It's all here. But any indication of what he had been thinking about when he composed never made it into the Western music here in the Western notation, and I think that's an interesting point, because being trained as he was, of course, if he's composing music, he's going to think in those terms. We never got to see it in the original Kazan project. The other thing we never saw, and it was intentional. Kazan was and the Metropolitan were trying to preserve the melodies. There was no indication of where the Isan should be. In fact, there's a lot of books from Greece, for example, or Lebanon or Syria. They don't indicate the Isan. People just know what to do, or the choir director tells the group how they want to do the Isan. So no indication here of what to do there. So if you're someone who knows nothing about Byzantine music, but you're reading a piece of music, your best shot at knowing what you should do is look at the last note on the bottom, okay, in terms of where the Isan should be. Some of the things that we all knew about, those of us who actually used this project early on, is that when we were in the syllabic chant form, which is the style like this piece here from the Apostica, where you would typically do one note per syllable, there were some pretty obvious issues where things were a little misaligned between where the accent should be in the text and where the accent should be in the music. And the explanation that we always heard, up to that time, which seemed plausible, was just that he was not a native English speaker, and therefore you could have things like this, where you were to give you an example here, it's going along fine. King of heaven and earth, O inscrutable creator, thou who for love of mankind, I mean, it just doesn't fit where the accent should be. Anyone who's trying to sight read this, good luck. If the music, really, I mean, if the music was naturally aligned there, people wouldn't be stumbling over it, all the time. And that's the thing we knew about back then. Later on, we'd come to learn some more things, which I'm going to point out later in the talk, which became interesting. But I'll just say that for now, because this was out of the bag very quickly. And what some of us did in our churches was to use, for example, "O Lord, I Have Cried," that we played and showed you before, together as a group. But when it came to the individual hymns, we'd just open up the book and still chant them individually, because sometimes it was hard to sing these together if the syllables weren't well aligned. Another book, so Kazan's 74 when his music first comes out. In 75, another book that came out that was very helpful at that time was the Melkite hymnal. The Melkites, they are basically the Orthodox who are under the Pope. They have all of our traditions except they're under the Pope. So they use the same kind of music and all of that. So very helpful to have their hymnal. And again, Kazan started with Vespers, and then Orthros, and then some of the seasonal parts of the year. Didn't really get to the feasts, Manaean type stuff until much later. And so it's like, well, what do you do if you want to have music? Well, their emphasis here with the Melkite hymnal was really around festal apolitikia and kondakia and things like that. And the other thing that was helpful here is it would show you would get to learn some of the special melodies that might come out. Special melodies tend to come out on feasts, right? And just general Vespers and Orthros, you weren't going to find any evidence of that in there. So for example, if you look at this kondakion from the feast of the entrance of the Theotokos in the temple, I'll sing a little bit and I'll ask somebody, who recognizes that melody and where else do you typically hear it? The most pure temple of our holy Savior, and the most precious and bright bridal chamber, the virgin sacred treasury of the glory of God. So where does that come from? Anyone know? I'm hearing a lot of mumbling, but it's used for the Kentucky of the cross. What else? Do we have, I don't want to give it away, but some very common names. Some archangel, okay. The Feast of the Archangels, November 8th. It's the melody that's used for the preparing of that feast as well. So this gave us an opportunity to actually learn some of these and then recognize them as when we would hear these melodies in other places. Oh, wait a second, there's these special melodies. But sometimes the placement of the music with the specific text in the way it was composed didn't always work out that well. For example, my priest nearly cringed when for the feast of the Nativity of the Theotokos, I said, "Mothers cannot be virgins." Just right. Yeah, nor virgins, mothers. Yeah. So, I'm a little hoarse from last night, but. If this sounds completely unfamiliar, that's because we usually talk about motherhood and virginity, not usually mixing together, and our texts tend to be a lot more, what was the word you used yesterday, Michael? Poetic, thank you. They tend to be more poetic, so anyway. Then in 1977, we had the Divine Liturgy Hymnal from the Greek Orthodox Department of Religious Education in 1977. And I give them credit for trying, okay? But it's very clear when you looked at this hymnal, its purpose was really different. It wasn't it didn't have a vision like Metropolitan Philip in terms of what he was trying to do. The vision here is they wanted to have some stuff in English, and I give them a lot of credit for that. But there was no flexibility in terms of the mindset, in terms of what you could do with the Byzantine melodies in the English language. The mindset was clearly, here's the melody and here's how we know it in Greek, and now we're going to try to fit some English to it, okay? And it's why for many years in the Greek Archdiocese, you know, people were just like, well, we don't do Byzantine music in English because it just doesn't sound good. Well, yeah, it doesn't sound good when you're singing stuff like, Lord, I call to you, okay? Or when you say, unto you, O Lord, I call. Yeah, you know, and when you look at what's really blatant about this is look below, if you can read the Greek. Yeah, Kyrie kekraxa prose. Feel the beat there? It gets completely lost if you just have one syllable over like 9 notes, okay? And so this one is pretty obvious why there really wasn't a lot of adaptation of English in the Greek Archdiocese, at least after this attempt here in 1977. Then Bishop Basil was teaching at St. Vladimir's Seminary, and he started in 1979 to produce, I'll get this playing here so you can hear some of this. It disappeared. Let's try that again. Yeah. To produce music using our translations. That was very well written compared to some of the other stuff that we had, and we didn't really have much. We didn't have anything in our archdiocese for Troparia and Kondakia feasts. We had the Melkite hymnal, and then his stuff started coming out, and by and large, you know, a number of us felt it was better, and we wanted to be able to use this. And Bishop Basil has produced a tremendous amount of music, and those of you familiar with it, you know, you can find a bunch of it on his website. But there's a lot of stuff that's not on the website there, you know, that I have from back in the day. So, and then Holy Transfiguration Monastery in Brookline, Massachusetts, came out in 1982 with their Divine Liturgy book. And the reason we know about it is because their sister community in Brookline, Mass, the Holy Nativity Convent, recorded a cassette tape, and for those of you that don't know what a cassette tape is now, they recorded a cassette tape of the liturgy that basically opened with this very well composed doxology in tone 1. Glory to thee who has shone forth the light, glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill among men. We praise thee, we bless thee. And you can see why this got adopted by a number of people, because it was using similar translations as we did. And there's a lot of thought that went into it. And this is the first music that, certainly that I saw, where there was indications of 2 things that we weren't seeing in the other music that we had. Up here, you know, for example, indication of where the Isan note is here. You know, that there's a D here, and then there's a C here, okay? And then sometimes there were some other notes, but anyway, it was indicated up there. The other thing that was neat, which you can barely see, but right up here, left choir and right choir. Choir number 1, and then alternating with choir number 2. Okay, and if you were at the doxology last night, after Father Mark spun the chandelier around, we were going antiphonally back and forth, which is how the doxology is to be chanted. So it's great. There's more indications in this music here. It's also interesting that they didn't put bar lines in. They figured people would figure those out in terms of where the accent was in the text. Glory to thee who has shown forth the light. Matches up very nicely with the music that they composed here. The monastery also produced a book in 1985 that covered mostly stuff from Holy Week and Pascha. and that was very helpful. A number of things. They had some things from other times of the year in there as well, but the main focus was Great Lent and Pascha. A number of us were able to to use that as well, to the benefit in our parishes. And then in 1984, so now we've moved really from the 70s with up to Bishop Basil. Now we've started talking about the 80s with Holy Transfiguration Monastery, and then the Romanian Archdiocese here in America with Father Nick Apostola, also from the Boston area, from the Romanian parish in Worcester. In 1984, he actually published a book of Byzantine chant, which is really interesting. It has some really good examples in it and stuff. But one of the things that's in that book that's particularly interesting is really this first example that we see of Byzantine chant in both notations. And it takes a lot of work to do this, to lay this out, and especially if you're going to try to do it on a computer. But it becomes very useful in the sense that their experience in Romania, and you see sort of where they are, right on the border between East and West, right? All their music in Romania basically follows this kind of format. We have both notations, so you have some people that read Western, you have some people that read Byzantine, and they can all sing together. And so it's really the first example we see of that. Not really interested in kind of critiquing this in terms of how it lines up and stuff like that, but I do think this is interesting. There are on the internet some things on YouTube that have been put out there by a guy called Eurobiz, Eurobyz, and all of his chant that's out there of some choirs chanting, he has scrolling across the screen music that's in both notations, like this. So you can follow with the Western, you can follow with the Byzantine. It's kind of neat. And then we have Byzantine Music in the New World, which was a recording that was put out by Vasilis Hadjinicolaou in 1986 from Montreal. And one of the things I think is really neat, and I only discovered this a few years ago, Paul Jabara, if he's still here, Paul sang on that recording as like a teenager or something like that, right? Yeah. So, So I don't actually have a digital version of that recording, but I can play some of his music so you can hear what it sounds like. But he made this recording, which was really interesting. It was experimental in a number of ways. In addition to traditional Byzantine chant with Isan, he also did some experimental things with harmonizing Byzantine music, but in a way that still kept a lot of the character of Byzantine music. And Mike referred to a composer yesterday that had composed like that as well. Hadjinicolaou's approach to be able to work with people who weren't trained classically in Byzantine chant like he was to basically write out the Isan line as a separate line here. So he did it here, albeit in bass clef. These days people typically write it out in treble clef, but both lines are there. So anyone who can read music can start singing and know what they're supposed to do in terms of at least where the notes are supposed to be. The other thing that's interesting about this that I'll point out is that Hadjinicolaou's music was always keyed on where he wanted people to sing it. So you'll notice here that the bass note that we're starting with here is an E. Does anyone know what tone this is in? You have to be louder than that. Other than Father David, he's the professor. Yeah. What tone is this? Using our tone numbering system. That man right there, 8, Corey. Okay, it's tone 8, but typically when we write tone 8, we write it with C as the bass note, and that's become more of a standard these days as to write Byzantine music with C as sort of your bass note, in this case for a tone 8. And then if you want to pitch it higher, great, you can always pitch it higher. I mean, even Western music, I've come to learn working with Paul this year to prepare for the Archdiocese convention, you can pitch it wherever you want. And Paul will often pitch things higher than they're written. And so the same thing can work with the Byzantine music. It makes it really hard to read as Byzantine music when it's in a different key than people would be used to. We even see some of that in Kazan as well. Kazan, when he started his project, in that first excerpt that I was showing you, he would base tone 1 on an E, because that's where he expected people to sing it. Later standardized on pitching on the D, as we saw from the St. Thecla excerpt, and that's more the standard these days, is to show tone 1 starting on a D, tone 8 starting on a C, and things like that. So I'm just kind of curious, how many people were aware or have heard of the Byzantine Music in the New World recording? Okay, good. So the word, yeah, I know you're. So yeah, it was really a seminal recording in this area. Okay, so these were a lot of the music that was available for Byzantine chant, written out in different ways and coming from different sources, up through let's say the mid '80s. What really started to happen in our archdiocese in particular is there's music available. People started being able to sing together. Byzantine choirs started forming. Some choir directors started using some of this music, in their choirs as well. Resurrectional Troparia, things like that. And in other words, it's like Byzantine chant had caught on, and it had gotten the attention of some people that, hey, there are people in other jurisdictions or archdioceses, hey, there are people chanting Byzantine music in English. How is it that they can do it and we can't? So there was really a lot of interest in trying to figure out, how to do this and how it can be improved and things like that. And when other people started paying attention, which is always what you want to have happen, then the flow of ideas starts, and people were able to say, if we were doing it, we'd like to do it better this way or that way or whatever. And a lot of that focus is on something that we're going to talk about here, because we get a lot of questions about what does this mean. Something called formulaic rules and violations of the formulaic rules. And a very simple definition of the formulaic rules is basically idioms and patterns of notes that form phrases in Byzantine music, with accented notes intended to line up with the accented syllables in the text. And I know you can kind of barely read that on the right. This is, especially on the bottom, but this is something that was written by Dr. Jessica Soukipilalis, who a number of you know, who has taught at a number of our SMIs, on her research into Byzantine music and how the different tones work. And one of the things that she points out here in sort of defining what are some of the melodic formulas, to basically point out where should the accented syllables be. And so she has a couple of phrases, in the beginning here, for example, though the tomb was sealed by a stone, or by bearing your Creator, and things like that. And then she gives examples in the bottom of what's going on here. It's stuff like the fact that in tone 1, which is based on it goes accent at the end, here at the end, la 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 la, and things like that. Things that people might intuitively know, having chanted for a number of years, but an attempt to try to write this down, explain it to people in terms of where's the music leading you in terms of which syllables get accented. Okay, that's the main concept here. And then there's also different ways that you can cadence in terms of this is the end of a phrase as opposed to this is the end of an entire piece. So that's the basic concept behind what we mean by formulaic rules. And now we want to move on and kind of explain why was the Kazan project, from a practical perspective for a lot of people, difficult to sing at times. Okay, and anyone here who's sung Kazan, I guarantee you, has stumbled at one point, or another. So this analysis of Kazan is basically intended to point out some of the reasons why, from a practical perspective, it's tough to sing. because that's the bottom line for me. And we always thought it was just because he wasn't a native English speaker, but actually it's a lot deeper than that, because it gets to the heart of how does Byzantine chant work in the first place. So for example, this is the 9th Doxastikon and Theotokion. So the first example we have here, if it, I'm going to take it lower. I got really low voice today because of the chanting last night. Oh, excuse me.
You want us to sing it?
Well, no, because you'll all stumble over it. So, So the first example here's the glory to the Father. Well, that da da da, that's just supposed to be one syllable. So it should be da 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 da. Okay, so there's one example. Now the second example is interesting because it's an example of something that we kind of inherited from the way the Arabic music works. So we have the to the Son and to the Holy. That with the 2/8 notes there, you typically wouldn't see 2 syllables and 2/8 notes in Byzantine music if it was written in Greek, for example. Because of Arabic and all the syllables, Mitri Amr had to adapt the Byzantine chant to the way the Byzantine music worked. And so he basically made up a couple of new rules, a couple of new formulaic rules to fit that language to the text. So certainly it doesn't necessarily mean that we should base the way that we set our English to the text based on the rules of the Arabic language, right? It should be looking at what are the rules of the English language, and is something like that even necessary, Another example in here, there were some things in Kazan that actually you would never find in Byzantine music. For example, a phrase that would start like and it's kanda, okay, and it's confirmed, okay, you just wouldn't see something like that in there. So that's what it means by not a classic formula. Here's an example where the accented note, when we say resurrection, we say resurrection, right? We don't say resurrection, okay? But here, you've got a phrase that goes, namely thy resurrection, okay? You wouldn't do that if you were actually taking the text and composing it to align with the syllables. This comment here is interesting from the perspective of, and we've seen this all in Kazan as well, thou didst enter while the doors. Now that's legitimate in terms of what you can do, but you would never go down to the low B natural or the zo in the scale unless there was a reason to do it, like Christ is born, glorify him, to use some of Bishop Basil's music. Christ is come from heaven, receive him. Christ is on earth. See, he's come down from heaven down to earth. Okay, so text painting is a reason to do that, okay? But thou didst enter, that's not what's trying to be conveyed here, okay? And that happens a lot, actually, in this particular selection. If you look at the, even in the beginning here, in the fullness of time, because we're going to talk about this later, we've got a couple of places that would typically only take one syllable. In the fullness of time, O Christ. It's supposed to be every 2 beats, right? Thou didst appear. Okay, those, again, should be one syllable. And we'll talk about, for example, what would you do if you were trying to compose from this text, to fit it in. My favorite one here is when you get down to the end here, we're almost at the climax, and you're starting to talk about wherefore grant us the understanding of the truth. I mean, that's pretty powerful, okay? You don't want to flub that one up. It's kind of hard, really. It's kind of hard when you're singing, wherefore grant us the understanding of the truth. I mean, that's not the way chant works. Those should each be one syllable, okay? And I can't tell you how many times when you're just going along and then all of a sudden it's like, you trip over the syllables. So those are just a couple of examples to give you a feel that it's more than just, when in the syllabic chant, that there happened to be an accent in the wrong place. Did I see a hand go up with a question there? No, okay. So let's take this apart and say, well, then how would something like this work? Well, there was a very interesting development that happened in the early 2000s. And you've all heard of, or most of you have heard of St. Anthony's Monastery in Arizona, south of Phoenix, on the way to Tucson. We have some people here from Tucson. The monk who's done all the music there, it's kind of neat. He actually happens to be somebody that I know personally as a friend. Back in 1990, when we started as alumni, started the MIT Orthodox Christian Fellowship, he was actually our first student in the OCF. And he was a convert to Orthodoxy, and he was like totally into it. And we actually got the opportunity every Wednesday night to chant Vespers together. And we had lots of discussions about Byzantine music, and he would share stuff that he had, I'd share stuff, and it was really great. And so I've known him for a long time. And then he went over to Mount Athos to become a monk and kind of disappeared. The next thing I know, he's transported over to Arizona to start, be one of the founding members of the monastery there. And his abbot basically gave him permission that his work could be to really focus on Byzantine chant and in English. And he was certainly exposed to what was out there all over the place, and certainly understood the need, to be able to produce things. And one of the things he did, which only a monk would have time to do, mind you, okay, is he studied, book after book after book of Byzantine music, primarily in Greek, and analyzed all the different phrases and where the syllables fell, okay? And basically put out something that was about 900 pages long, okay? That included for each of the tones, here's how the formulas work. And in a true MIT student or alumni fashion, he codified all of these phrases in binary, okay? So for example, there's a formula out there, and he gave it basically the coding of 001, 00100. And you're asking yourself, what does that have to do with Byzantine chant? Well, if you have a phrase that goes, that does a certain thing melodically, he's indicating with the ones where the accents are in there, okay? So if you have a phrase that goes, da 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 da, or da 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 da. So for example, the accent syllables here are in the fullness of time, O Christ. Okay, something like that. And so one example of how you can take that phrase and fit syllables to it is you need to have an English phrase that basically goes dot dot accent dot dot accent. Okay, so in the fullness of time, okay, O Christ. So there's really two accents in there. So in the fullness of time, O Christ. So you study this. So the way he started composing things, and this is not one of his compositions, this is an example of what you could do with his formula book, is you could say, oh, I have a text that goes, non-accent, non-accent, accent, non-accent, non-accent, accent, non-accent, non-accent. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 syllables. Is there a formula in this book that actually fits that pattern? And lo and behold, this music, what goes dot dot da 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 fits. So you can sing in the fullness of time, O Christ. And so that's basically the approach that some people have taken with this book that's been created to say, when we create the music, we have to make sure we're creating it so that the accented syllables fall in the places where the melody is supposed to be accented, as opposed to falling in random places, as sometimes happened in Kazan. So if you're wondering, that favorite phrase of mine here at the at the bottom here about the wherefore, it is on the right-hand side, grant us the understanding of the truth. What could you possibly do with something like that? Well, there's a couple of different ways you deal with it, but one possible solution, and again, this wasn't composed by anyone from St. Anthony's. This was just somebody who works with the formula book. I said, what's one thing that you could do, just as an example? So in that wherefore, you could go, wherefore grant us the understanding of the truth. Okay, you end on truth, right? Truth needs to be an accented syllable, and you don't want to have all those other syllables in the way, preventing you from actually being able to execute, a beautiful Byzantine melody. So, I've already said something about St. Anthony's, but I'm going to say a little bit more later. We all know Jessica, and kind of neat that St. Raphael comes back. He's been mentioned in Mike's talk. He's been mentioned twice now in my talk. For his canonization, and he's canonized by the OCA wanted to, was the ones who canonized him, and they wanted his Apologetikion to be available in both harmonized four-part version, as well as in an original Byzantine version as well. And I think what a lot of people don't realize, there actually was a Byzantine version that was created by the OCA. As I explained to our teens, who are not here in this talk because they have their own thing right now. In a true show of Orthodox unity, when he was canonized, the OCA wrote their own services for St. Raphael and said, we're going to remember him on the day that he reposed, which is February 27th. And we Antiochians said, no, but we're going to remember him our own way. We're going to write different texts. We're going to remember him on the Saturday that precedes the Archangels, which was his feast day. And so, for people who aren't familiar with this troparion here, the Apologetikion that was written by Jessica, it's an excellent piece of music. I'm not going to spend a lot of time analyzing it as to why it's excellent, but you will hear our teens chant this at the concert, tomorrow, when you get a chance. But this is an example of, she's got both parts written out here. And she composed this music specifically. Actually, I will point out a couple of things, because the teens were really good at picking up a couple of things here that they really liked. It starts out, your proclamation has gone forth throughout North America, calling the scattered sheep into the unity of the church. And at that point, all voices are singing the Isan in unison. So everyone's going, unity of the church. And the teens picked up on that right away. That's cool, She composed it in unison on the word unity. And I was like, that was intentional. That's exactly what she wanted to do there. So. And then, we started talking about St. Anthony's Monastery. I have an example of a concert from our Christmas concert before Rasim left the area. I asked him to get together our chanters in the diocese. One of the things I'll say about St. Anthony's and why it's become so popular is because the music they have available is available in both Western notation and Byzantine notation, and it's pretty thoroughly proofread. It's very rare to actually find a mistake in it. It has been composed according to those rules that they basically, figured out, after doing all that research. So it lines up very nicely in terms of the syllables. They also tend to use what I like to call liturgical English, the English that we're familiar with in the Antiochian Archdiocese. And, as I said, it's very well thought out in terms of what they've done. And they've actually added a few things here to their notation that you don't typically find when people are writing Byzantine chant Western notation that are actually very helpful to you as a chanter. One of those things is, they will show, for example, they'll put an accent in there. That doesn't mean to basically give it a traditional Western accent. It actually is to tell you where in the Byzantine notation there is emphasis, through the use of a flutter, or as what's known as a petasti. So you can basically get a sense when you're chanting this music, a guide to help you. I mean, you can figure it out if you practice beforehand where accents are supposed to be, but it's really nice where they've kind of put an element here in the Western notation to make it easier for you to read this through. The other thing that's really neat is sometimes tones, the melodies will borrow from another tone or another mode in the middle. We have lots of examples of this throughout the church year, but in this particular one here, which is from Christmas, when Augustus reigned, the Voxasticon of the Vespers. Let me find my mouse here. Let's see, where are we here? Did we say it again? Oh, Godhead, here we go. Did we pass it already? Oh, okay, all right. Well, basically, you're going along here in tone, the A's are flat here in terms of the way we tend to sing with the Antiochian archdiocese. It's rolled, and then it switches from being based on the G and all that, and it's telling you hard chromatic. He puts that in there, which means it's like tone 6. And then all of a sudden, the mode basically changes from na by the decree of Caesar. And then it goes back. And we the faithful, etc. Okay? So you'll see, it's both, he tells you which scale it's supposed to be by saying hard chromatic, and then he actually puts in the little Byzantine symbols here and here to tell you basically exactly where that mode change is. And you'll see those same symbols over in the Byzantine. So that's one of the reasons that it's been popular. There are a lot of people that have been working on producing, I'd say, this kind of new generation of Byzantine music. You also have Father Seraphim Dedis, who is the priest monk behind the Ages digital chant stand. He's based in Charlotte, North Carolina right now at the St. Nectarios parish. Together with St. Anthony's, they've just produced an amazing amount of music, and Father Nicholas Castanas from Holy Cross Seminary basically said those guys are kind of the lead horses in all this stuff that's out there now, just in terms of the quality and the volume of stuff they've produced. ByzantineChant.org, that's Stefan Esper's site. They've produced a lot of music using our translations, from the Nasser. It's available just in the Byzantine notation right now, but there's been a lot of research done there also to take some of the music from our tradition that might be unique, like from Mitri al-Nur, and to be able to put it into English and preserve some of that work that has been done over there.
It is 4:15 now. So those who do want to go to the museum tour, you can go now, and those of us who are interested, we can see.
This is my penultimate slide. So, and then we talked about Dr. Jessica Suki-Pilalis, also Basil Crow, who's from our archdiocese. They produce some things, but they don't have a lot of it, but they typically have produced things in both notations. And then, to end the talk is just basically what's next for the Antiochian Archdiocese, which is an open question. Basically, the communication that a number of us have been getting, and for reasons that I've explained before, is that the Kazan is now considered more or less outdated because of all of these developments now that have happened, especially since the turn of the millennium. And the fact that we are now going to have some new translations in our archdiocese, I see that as really creating an opportunity for us, if we're going to have to compose new music, to compose new Byzantine music according to some of these new standards. The Lesser Sanctification of Water booklet that Mike talked about yesterday, which is about to be published any year now, is one such example of where we can go, where all the chant is properly composed and available in both notations. But my concluding thought here is, this is all a process, right? Each decade kind of brought its wave of changes, and for me, it's great that there's all this music that's out there and available now. But also, being both, a mathematician, a scientist, and an artist, one of the things I think that's been missing from a lot of the music that's out there is really the sense of art around composing and how you compose. I don't think composition should be entirely about taking formulas in binary and trying to get things that kind of work from a syllabic perspective, but may not have been, say, inspired from the heart in terms of, like Jessica, for example, likes to say when she composes, and I hope we can get her to here at some point to talk about what she does. She says she looks at the text, she studies the text, and then the text speaks to her. And that becomes the generation of where this Byzantine music that she creates comes from. So I really think there's an opportunity to be more lyrical and inspired in the Byzantine music we create, and I think that's the challenge, but the opportunity for us here. So I'll end the talk here. If people need to go, fine. And if you have some questions, I'm happy to take questions from the floor.